going to analyze his administration, do a paper on it. Get a PhD. Don't take down his statue.
I want that Nathan Hale statue down. He's a failed spy. Washington should be outside the CIA headquarters.
Okay, so I was editing the video, and it was like 10 minutes of me ranting about Brian Kilmeade and why his books suck. But that's not what I'm going to do. I'm changing this video already. Because I don't think it's productive to just make a takedown video of Brian Kilmeade and say, oh, his books are bad and he sucks, he's a bad historian. As much as YouTube would love me to do that, I think I'm going to take the rest of this video and the rest of the time I have with you right now to talk about something important. The dangers of historical bias. And we're going to talk about Brian Kilmeade, assuredly, because he's a really good modern example of that. But let's actually have a productive conversation. So let's get to that.
Well, we hear a lot of American history these days, but most of it seems to be kind of a downer. Stories that paint America in a bad light and suggest that the founding generation wasn't really so great and American ideals aren't really so great and all of that.
Yeah, we were pro beating the British. That's one thing we made clear in the introduction. We're glad we won.
You don't want to make America better. You want to destroy our past because we don't live up to the lofty standards of the shirtless skateboarders who want to petition and protest to try to intimidate reporters on a nightly basis.
They have the lowest standards, and not just to personal hygiene, that I've ever seen in any group. They're totally ignorant. They're illiterate vandals.
How the left is dismantling history, American identity to establish a Marxist utopia. And it is scary what is out there. They're going after the Confederate statues. They're not stopping there. They're going after Jefferson and William and Mary.
And you're looking at live pictures out of Charlottesville, Virginia. This is where violent clashes have broken out between white nationalists and counter-protests there.
Alleyways that they would usually set up. I don't know if you can see this. There is some sort of gas or smoke being dispensed right now. Everyone is fleeing the scene.
In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he discovered America. In 1620, the Pilgrims braved the Atlantic and settled in the new colonies. They had a nice dinner with the natives. They called it Thanksgiving. Johnny Appleseed wore a pot on his head and walked across the nation, planting seeds. America was founded in 1776 when the brutal English massacred patriots in the streets of Boston. The Civil War was about states' rights. All of those are false. Well, Christopher Columbus did sail the ocean blue in 1492, and he technically discovered America. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. These are biased myths that are taught in classrooms across the country, biased myths that are commonly shared as stone-cold fact. And now more than ever in history, we are facing a crisis of depicting and telling what is right and what is wrong, or what is wrong being an idealized America. See, for the longest time, historians would write histories of the country, histories of presidents, of people, of wars, that were light. They didn't talk about the true reasons. There was no sin in America in their belief. There was no wrongdoing. Every president was a good Christian. Every general was a good man. And we know now that that's not really true. But there are those out there today who are writing, much like Brian Kilmeade, who would say otherwise. They would say there's a war on history, that the evil left is trying to rewrite the narrative of American history because everyone was evil and everyone was bad. See, when you go to people like Brian Kilmeade, they have a narrative they want to portray, that America is number one. They would rather look past all the sins and negativity of the past to paint that idealized picture. They don't want to give you the whole story. They don't want to give you all the facts. Historians like Brian Kilmeade, or Glenn Beck even, if they could be called historians, they want to make you believe that America is the greatest country on earth. Whether that's true or not, I cannot fully say. But they want to make you believe that idealized past. They want to make you think that everything was nice and that no sins were committed. They want to paint that pretty picture of America. They don't want George Washington to be a bad guy. They don't want Andrew Jackson to be a bad guy. They don't want slavery to be part of the American story. They would rather look past all that, inject patriotism into the veins of history, because it just seems better, and it serves a political narrative. Now, this is seen on both sides of the political spectrum, of course. If you look at the 1619 Project, which aimed to rewrite American history to place more focus on the American slave, a seemingly innocent motive, but looking at some of the accusations they made, like the American Revolution being a war fought for slavery, it's purely to push a narrative. Thus, viewing history with bias, the moment you put even the slightest grain of bias, skewing the story to support a narrative or a particular personal motive even, you're not writing history. You're writing fan fiction.
If you think about the word propaganda, what image comes to your mind? Perhaps these posters? Or maybe these newspapers? What about textbooks? How many of you in here have studied history using a textbook before? Show of hands, please. Thank you. Looking around the room, it seems quite a high number. For many of us, textbooks are often a trustworthy source of information. The traditional question we ask when we study history is, what happened in the past? But I think a more urgent question is, who chooses how and what we learn in history?
So who does get to decide what we learn in history? Oftentimes historians. Other times it's popular historians, people like Brian Kilmeade. Brian Kilmeade's books are written with that pro-American skew. That idea that America could do no wrong. And in one of his interviews, as shown earlier in the video, the interviewer says, everything that's written now about American history is kind of, painting America in a bad light, or saying that the founding fathers were not that great. And they weren't. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at history as it was. Looking at these characters in history as they were. As humans, not demigods. They weren't statues on high pedestals. They weren't oil paintings. They were men of their time. Though many humble, many were self-serving. They were just common men doing amazing things. But they also sinned because they were common men. They owned slaves. They were racist. But that shouldn't detract too much from what we learn about them. We should learn that in tandem with what they did, but we shouldn't focus on either or. We should learn them both. And with people like Kilmeade who want to just teach the good, and people who, like, right at the 1619 Project, just want to push the bad, they both are looking at it the wrong way, in my opinion. Both good and bad go hand in hand. They aren't inseparable. They are history. History is not just a one-way street. It's a narrative. It's a story. It's got plot points. It's got villains. It's got heroes. It's got anti-heroes. It's got themes. And to break apart each individual theme or character or person or plot point, you're not left with the story anymore. You're left with something that someone wants to look at. Just a tiny piece of the greater whole. And I don't think that's a productive or healthy way to learn history. So historians like Brian Kilmeade, historians, pop historians, who write histories that are biased, magazines that are biased towards one political or personal motive, they aren't doing anything beneficial. If anything, they're just digging the trenches deeper and building up better fortifications.
And I believe that part of the purpose of learning history is to learn how to distinguish between the true or the false for ourselves, to criticize and to analyze. Textbooks should not decide which information is more valuable than others. Students should be able to do that. Students should be able to wonder why we're learning this in history rather than simple pieces of facts. And that is the ideal education I'm looking for. The society could change if we all become aware of the importance of correct history education. It could be different if we all get engaged with the changes government make. It could be different if people learn that everyone has a voice. We need to stop thinking that history is just another subject that school makes us learn, but rather acknowledge that history is alive right now, and it is exercising its power by influencing the past, present, and the future. So now, when I ask who chooses how and what we learn in history, perhaps the answer should be we choose to critically evaluate and examine what we learn in history instead of blindly accepting in order to conform.